We are in the middle of chapter 5 of the Maimer, Basi, Legani, Tafshin Chaf. We are on page Chaf Gimel in the handout. The link for the handout is in the chat. So we are in the second half here of the Maimer, Basi, Legani, and we are talking about the idea of Tzivos Hashem. We explained how the first half of the Maimer, where we talked about Seviv Kalam and being drawing and accessing through Iskafia and Ishapcha through the divine service down here in this world, we access the essence of God, and it becomes manifest, revealed in the entire world. And we said not only that, but also Mamala Kalam, that every world and every state and every level is impacted in its own unique way and in its own unique state. Then we said this is the reason, the fact that a Jew, through his divine service, brings this about. That's why a Jew is called Tzivos Hashem. That's why they're called Tzivos Hashem. And we said, what does Tzivos Hashem mean? So we asked the question, chapter 4 was all about explaining a question as to why we find that by the exodus of Egypt, the Jewish people are called Tzivos Hashem. So we explained that. And now we're in the answer. In chapter 5, we moved on to the answer here. We explained that the word tzvais has three meanings. Tzava has three meanings. One is a soldier. Another is time, limited time. And the third one is colors, complexity. And so chapter 5, we began by explaining the idea of colors. Now we're moving on to time. And then in the coming Mamarim, in the coming chapters, the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, in his Maimer in chapter 11, explains the idea of soldier. So that's not really touched on in this Maimer. We're going to focus on time that's going to carry us through the end of the Maimer here. So we explained the idea of colors, that every color on its own is we say it's not beautiful. Beauty comes when you bring all these colors together. So what was it? There are two things. Number one, we said that when they come together, so that reveals the true essence of all the colors when they can be brought together. And in addition, that enhances the individual color as well. So that when a color is on its own, it's kind of bland. But when the color is mixed with other colors, suddenly the colors start to bring out their own vibrancy and their own beauty as a result of coming together, because you're revealing the essence of the colors when they all come together. That's similar to what we talked about in the Maimer, that there's the idea of bringing down a revelation, a manifestation of godliness that is equal everywhere, because it transcends all of it. But then there's the uniqueness in every single individual level and state also has its own unique aspect. So that was the idea of colors. Then we explained that the word Sava also means a limited time. And we quoted the verse that says, Yamim Yitzar v'le'echad behem, that God created days, and we said, Loi echad behem, the word Loi can have two meanings. It's written one way and it's pronounced another way. I mean, or it's not, when we read it, we read it as if it was written another way. So the written word is Loi with an aleph, which means no. So the simple meaning of the verse is that God creates these days and knows, in other words, what's going to happen all of days. And these days haven't even occurred yet. And then another one is V'layachbem, and to him there is one of them, meaning that God creates all these days and selects one of them that's special and unique and precious to him. That's the simple meaning. We're going to explain here in the Maimer a mystical meaning and rereading and understanding of this verse, both the way it's written and the way it is read. But the point is that every person, when we talk about tzava and the meaning of tzava as in a limited time, every person has a set time for their divine service in this world. And now we're on page Chav Gimel. We're in the second paragraph of chapter 5. Let's take it from the top here, of chapter 5, of the second paragraph here of chapter 5. And we have to understand what is the meaning that God creates a set amount of days, which we take to mean that the person has to be invested in his days. We're talking about the Torah mitzvahs that a person studies and performs every single day. We know that the world is perfected and elevated and sensitized to godliness through study of Torah and performance of mitzvahs, each in its own unique way. But these impact the world. Why does it have to be specifically Baba Yamim coming in his days, meaning that all days have to be filled with service? To the extent that if we're missing one day, as I said, if a person is missing one day of observance, so that's that he's missing his own garment. If the mitzvahs a person does are the garments, so what's the difference? What days you do them on? However many mitzvahs you do, that's how many garments you have. right? Why can't you just cram a lot of Torah and mitzvahs into one day and then take the rest of the week off? Right, so but this is Shazoin the Yom Yutzaru. This is what it means that he creates these days, he forms these days, that every single day has to be a day. And it's only through Yom Yutzaru, through a person working every single day and not missing a day of divine service, that we can reach the second half of the verse, the V'lo Yachad B'hem, that to him there's the oneness, which will explain exactly what that means, how you arrive at that. But first we have to understand, why is it that a person's divine service has to fill every single day? Why do we need to serve God every single day? So Tzemach Tzedek explains that since the soul performs Torah mitzvahs, studies Torah and performs mitzvahs, as it is invested and clothed in the body. In other words, that the soul on its own could study Torah up in heaven, but the way the soul fulfills its mission is only when it's enclosed in a physical body, in this physical world. And so therefore, so since the soul is in the body, so therefore there's going to be a situation where the soul might have a need to cleanse itself from the body, because the soul comes down into the physical body. That's physical. It's made up of good and evil, good and bad. And it comes into a world that's also a mixture of good and bad. We're not talking about the worlds of pure divine holiness and spirituality and oneness with God. We're talking about the physical world. After the sin of the tree of knowledge, everything is mixed together, and everything is made up of good and bad. We know that the animal soul, like we said, it says in Tanya, it comes from the neutral level of Klippa, and so therefore it's got some good, it's got some bad. And so when you put a divine soul that's 100% godly into that body, that's a mixture of good and bad, it's unavoidable. An unavoidable consequence is that the soul will be dirtied by the unholiness of the body and of the world. And so therefore there will be a scenario where the soul will have to cleanse its garments. So the garments are its performance of Torah mitzvahs. These are the garments of the soul, but since the soul is performing them in a body, so it's unavoidable that when the soul engages in these garments, the performance of Torah mitzvahs, will be tainted, they will be dirtied by the body. I mean, simply you could say that when a person performs a mitzvah, and any ulterior motive, any personal benefit or drive that's involved in it is in a sense a stain on the garment. So the mitzvah itself is performed. You have the garment, but the garment, because of this good and evil combination, will be affected, will be dirty. This is similar to what's explained in Chassidus about the phrase Maisim Tovim. We refer to mitzvahs as Maisim Tovim, good deeds, and we don't refer to them as good deeds simply to say that a mitzvah is anything nice that you do. You help somebody out, that's a mitzvah. So obviously doing good things and being nice and kind to others is a mitzvah, but it's the mitzvah of gemilas chasadim, of being kind to others. But it's not that a mitzvah is simply a good deed, something that's not doing something nice to others. A mitzvah is fulfilling God's command. So why are they called good deeds? So this explains, because it's not enough just to fulfill God's command. If God has a command, if the mitzvahs are just God's command and we obey, so then you perform the maisim, perform the deeds, the actions, the tasks that He tasked you with. But that's not enough. The actions themselves have to be good. We have to bring goodness into the act, meaning that the act itself alone is not enough. The act has to be a good act. Maisim tovim, we have to bring goodness into the act. So, which means to cleanse, to clean, and to purify the actions and the motives with which we engage and perform the Torah mitzvahs. So how does one wash his actions? So that's done through the service of tefillah, of prayer. In other words, when a person performs a mitzvah, so when they're rooted in the material, in the physical, it's the act itself is grounded, it has a certain earthiness that's attached to it. And so the performance of the mitzvah is you could say tainted in this context, is tainted by the earthiness of the experience in the physical world. How does one, so a person can perform mitzvahs, can fulfill God's will, can do a mitzvah, and yet the act itself is not a good act. Meaning you can't sense the goodness of it. It is tainted by whatever his ulterior motive, let's call it. how does one elevate themselves? How does one pick themselves up, raise themselves, and therefore their actions and their behaviors higher than off of the ground of the material? How does that happen? That happens through prayer. Prayer is the process through which we elevate ourselves. We lift ourselves up from the ground. We lift ourselves up off of the earthiness that's around us. We open ourselves up to something higher, something beyond just the material and the corporeal. And we know that the elevating of all of our study of Torah and performance of mitzvahs, as well as the impact that has our performance of mitzvahs, study of Torah, with the energy it draws. So how is that elevated? It comes through prayer. Why? Because a prayer we know is likened to the ladder, right? Like the ladder referenced in Yaakov's dream, Jacob's dreams of a ladder that's rooted in the ground, and the top reaches into the heavens. And that was a metaphor for prayer. Prayer is like a ladder that's rooted in the ground, but the person, through the process of prayer, climbs that ladder, rises above the material world. And prayer is a daily obligation. It's a daily chore, something that we do every single day, yom v'layla, morning and night, day and night. Why? Why do we have daily prayers, morning and night? Because prayer is established in comparison to the daily offerings in the temple. It takes the place today of the daily offerings. There's a daily offering in the morning, there's a daily offering in the afternoon. The service in the temple is bookended by these two offerings, morning and evening. And so we pray, our prayers are built on that same framework of morning and evening. The morning daily offering and the afternoon evening daily offering. As explained that explains the verse that says, know today, and set it upon your heart, that Havaya, that God, as He's transcendent to Elikim, He is God who is present in creation. That's the interpretation of the verse. The inyan of Hashivaisa, what does it mean to place this on your heart? So we have to know today, and we have to set it upon our heart. So the simple meaning is that you really have to take this message to heart. You really have to internalize this idea, this concept. But what is this term, set it upon your heart? What is this a reference to? It's Avodas HaTfilah. It's talking about prayer. Like the Gemara says, what is the service of the heart? When it says that you serve God with all your heart, what is the service of the heart? That is prayer. And the step before the service of the heart, what is that? What is the prelude to prayer, to the service of the heart? Is know today. Know, meaning that the verse is telling us, know that the day, just as a day is comprised of night and morning, light and dark, right? And both come together, and these form a day. As the verse says, that it was evening, it was morning one day. So God creates the world. He creates it that every single day is a combination of morning and evening, of light and dark. So just as we know, know the day, know that a day is made up of light and dark. So the same it has to be applied to your heart. Just as the day is made up of light and dark, so the same is true of your heart. That just as is in time, so too is within the person's own soul, in his own self. That just as the day is made up of light and dark, the same is true with regard to the heart. The human heart, man's heart, is made up of two hearts. It says, to your heart. But levavecha, a more literal, closer reading of the word levavecha, as opposed to libecha, as opposed to your heart. But levavecha, which means your heart, but also you can read it to mean your hearts in the plural. Why your hearts? Because you have, in a sense, two hearts. You have the good inclination and the bad inclination, both which reside in the heart. So you have these two dueling emotional pulls within oneself. And so when we talk about knowing God, we talk about connecting with God. It's not enough. So now let's reread the verse. What's the verse telling us? Know that Havaya is Elikim. What does it mean to know? So it says know today. What does it mean know today? We're trying to tell the person that a person needs to serve God with his entire existence. that we don't just serve God with our godly soul, you don't just serve God with the higher part of yourself, but every part of your being, your whole existence, the good, the bad, and the ugly, all of it needs to be involved and engaged in serving Hashem. So how do we do this? So the verse tells us first, know that God creates reality, that a day is made up of good, of light and dark, of night and day, of good and evil, and together they form one day. If you're missing the night, you don't have a day. A day is only a day when there's night and day. And the same is true. A whole service of God is one that doesn't ignore the animal soul, one that doesn't ignore the evil inclination, but one that includes it. So look at the day and see, just as there's a day, so too apply the same to your hearts, in the plural, that your hearts, both your good inclination and your evil inclination, both of them need to be meaning have to be connected with God. That also the evil inclination should also be returned to serving God, like the verse says, the pasuk in V'ahavta, the Shema, we say b'chol levavcha, with all your heart, and as the Gemara explains, what is levavecha? Again, this double, the word, it doesn't say libecha, but levavvecha, which implies sort of two hearts, b'shnei tzerecha, with your two inclinations, your two impulses, and it's through this, through including within one service both the good inclination and the evil inclination, the godly soul and the animal soul. It's through that we arrive at Havaya Echad, that God is one, which is the same as the idea of Havaya Holikim. So he's throwing around a bunch of concepts here. Let's just keep it simple because it's not really, we're not getting into this specific topic now. But the idea that God is one, when we say that God is one, or Havaya is Elikim, there's God as he's transcendent, as he's beyond reality, and then there's Elikim as God's present in reality. So the task of the Jew, the job of the Jew is to recognize that it's all one, that it's no two separate domains or separate realities. It's not that there's God as he's transcendent that operates on one plane, and then there's God as he's within creation on another. And the same is true when we say Shema Yisrael, when we say that God is Hashem Echad, God is one. What are we saying? That in a space where it seems that there are other things other than God, that even there we bring in God's oneness, we reveal God's oneness, that it's all part one and the same. So now, how does one get to that affirmation? How does one get to that realization? Well, if a person is going to come to that realization or that dedication to God, to have that really apply to themselves and resonate within themselves, it's impossible to do that without incorporating your animal soul. It's impossible to do that without including the material world. Because if a person needs to come to the realization that God is that God that is transcendent, God that's immanent in creation, is all one, then how do you do that? By ignoring reality. To say that reality, the material world, or that his own evil inclination, his own unholiness, the impulses that seem to run away from God on the surface, to ignore those and to proclaim God's oneness is not real oneness. Because it means that there's a part of yourself that you're ignoring, that you're avoiding, that you're pretending doesn't exist, where God isn't one. So in order to bring about the Havaya Echad, so the verse is saying here, the verse that we're quoting, the verse that we're saying that you have to know that God, that Havaya is Elikim, that these two come together, that they're one, that God as he's transcendent, God as he's immanent, are all one. The way to do that is only through including your animal soul and your body and your material experience into that service. Because to ignore it is then there's no oneness. Then you're escaping from that. So it undermines the point that we're trying to make here. So the first step is think about the day. Recognize that God's creation is good and evil. That he creates it in that way, that there's light and darkness, and they all come from God. This all comes from the same creator. And so therefore, they're all part of that oneness. Then when you look at the world around you, you come to that realization. Then you apply it to yourself and recognize that you also have day and night within you, light and dark, good and bad. But it's all one. God creates you that way. God creates you in that state. And so therefore, every part of you is given to you by God. And so therefore, every part of you, even the seemingly ungodly, needs to be drafted into the service of God. So it's through that we come to Havaya Elikim, become one. And v'zeu klolos inyan avodas hatfilah. So this is the purpose, the function of prayer. She avodas yom yom, which is a daily occurrence, a daily service. Yom Yitzhar, as we said, that he creates the days in the plural, meaning every day he creates is a significant day. It's a day in its own right. And that's the service, the divine service of prayer every single day. Is to wash and to clean the garments of the Torah and of the mitzvahs by and through that he causes lo yechad behem with an aleph. What does that mean? Lahamshich mibchinas lo ba'alef haksiv shehu l'mayla mishtalshus sheyimshach be'echad. So we said that the verse says Yamim Yutzaru v'lo yechad behem, and we discussed the simple meaning of that verse. But here we're saying like this. Here we're getting into the Chassidic interpretation, the interpretation in the Maimer. Yamim Yutzaru, God creates every single individual day. And every day is significant. Why is every day significant? We ask, why do you have to serve God every single day? Because every day is a mix of good and bad. And so you can't just ignore a day. You can't just say, well, I'm going to, on Yom Kippur, that's the day that I'm going to serve God, and I'll do so much on that day that it'll cover me for the rest of the year. What about the rest of your what about the rest of your year? What about the rest of your life? All those days are days God gave you, and they're days that need to be used for the service of Hashem. So therefore, we have to serve God in all the days, because every day is significant. Because every day is significant, but the day is made up of good and bad. You have your days that you're inspired, your days you're less inspired. So for that, every single day we have to pray. What is the idea of prayer? The idea of prayer is to take every single day and elevate it, refine it, clean it, cleanse it. Take the unholiness of that day, the unholiness of that experience, that stage in life that the person's in, and elevate it, refine it, and sensitize it, bring it into the surface of God. To ignore it is not to live by Havaya Elokim, that transcendence. So when a person is invested every single day and prays every single day, when he's Yom Mitzvah, he realizes that God creates every day. And God creates every single day with everything that's in that day, everything that comes with that day. So then, v'loy echad behem. Then he takes loy of echad and puts it bahem in them in the days. What does this mean? So as we said, the word v'loy in this verse, in Tehillim, is written, spelled lamed aleph, which means no, and it's pronounced lamed vav, which means to him. So there's loy, there's the negative loy, the no, loy with an aleph, which is the negative, and then there's the loy, which is the positive, loy to him, which is a positive. Of course, if the word is written one way and pronounced another way, if it's spelled one way and pronounced another way, then obviously these two versions of the word are valid. Right? The previous Rebbe, if you look in his Maimer, he quotes this verse and he actually spells the word that way. At the end, towards the end of chapter 10 of his Maimer, he says "V'lo yachad b'hem yamim yitzar v'lo yachad b'hem." He spells "v'lo" lamed vav aleph. So he puts them all in because really both are valid. And here we're going to bring them all together. So what does it mean loy echad b'hem? What's the difference between loy with an aleph and loy with a vav? So the letter aleph, which comes from the word pele, which means wonder, or something that's totally removed and beyond, that represents, aleph is also aluf, that represents keser. It's the highest, it's beyond hishtalshus, beyond reality. It's a total transcendent level. So that's loy with an aleph. Aleph represents total transcendence. Vav, the letter vav is 6. The numerical value of vav is 6, and the numerical value of aleph is also 1, which that represents God's ultimate oneness, where he's one and totally beyond anything and everything. But then there's vav. Vav is 6. Vav is also the shape of the vav. Also is in a way you write a vav is a downward motion, one downward motion, which is drawing from above to below, and that represents the 6. The numerical value of vav 6. The 6 emotions, the 6 divine attributes, which as we discussed kind of a bit and touched upon, at least in previous class in this Maimer, that the attributes are the way God chooses to be known to the world. So it says God is lowering himself into reality. So what happens when a Jew fills all his days and davens every day, meaning he elevates, he refines his behavior, his mitzvahs, his divine service every single day. So through that, he draws loy be'alef haksiv. He brings the loy with the aleph, which is shulamayla mishlachas, beyond creation, beyond created existence. Created reality. Sheyumshach be'echad, it should come down into one. Al yidei loy bevav hakri, which is through the vav, the loy with a vav, which is the way it's read. Shem vav midis alien is the divine attributes. So what a person does is through his divine service, he brings God as he is transcendent into reality. So God, as he is within reality, immanent, is expressed in a sense by the divine attributes. Right? God creates the world in 6 days. Every day is another attribute. So the Sunday is kindness, and Monday is severity, and so on and so forth. So God's engaged and his engagement and investment in reality, in creation, is vav, is divine attributes. God, as he precedes creation, or as he is beyond all of reality, that's aleph, and that's why you have the positive and the negative. All you could say beyond reality is a negative. It's a big void. That's a loy with an aleph. Through a divine service, we bring loy with an aleph. We bring God, and that's the idea of havaya and elikim. We bring havaya, which in this verse is symbolized by the loy with an aleph. God as he's transcendent, into loy with a vav, into elikim, into God as he's present within reality. I hope this is clear. It's just interesting that in the verse itself, in the simple reading of the verse, so loy echad behem, the loy goes on the days. That none of these days have occurred. And the loy with a vav, the reading refers to God. Loy is to him, to God, that God chooses one of them. Here, in our interpretation, it's kind of reversed, that the loy with a vav is God as he is within creation, invested in creation. Loy with an alpha is God as he's really beyond creation, totally beyond. So this is the meaning, then this answers the question we asked in the beginning of this paragraph, which is why do we have to fill every day with divine service? What's so significant about the day? Why do we have to have days in the plural? Because as Tzemach Tzedek explains, that the source of physical days is from the spiritual days. What are the spiritual days? Or divine days, the higher days. The higher days are the 6 divine attributes, as I just mentioned, that God creates the world in 6 days. Why is it created in 6 days? Because there's 6 divine emotions. So the days correspond to Yomin Elohim, which is the divine emotions. God's, as it were, divine emotions, attributes are also referred to as days. Right? To say like Chesed is Azul Kol Yomin, goes with all the days, meaning with all of the divine attributes. Right? So the reason we have a 7-day week is because of the 7 divine attributes. So since these days come from from these divine attributes, and through divine service in every single one of these days of our lives, that we draw the divine God as he's transcendent into reality. So we see, in a sense, we have the full picture is similar to what we talked about earlier. So in the first part of the Maimon, we talked about drawing Soiviv, and we talked about drawing Mamale, the transcendent and the immanent. And then we say that this is why the Jewish people are called Tzivos Hashem, Tzivos, because the word Tzava, we said, means color, nuance, complexity. And as we explained, that color has these 2 properties as well, these 2 qualities. On the one hand, all the colors come together. That's sort of a transcendent idea. But on the other hand, every color is enhanced. Every individual color is enhanced. That's Mamale. Similarly, when we say Tzava is time, what's the significance of time? The same idea. The idea of time of divine service every single day is drawing the transcendent, the veloy with an aleph, into the veloy, into the time. So you have set days. Every single day is significant. Every single day is a day, and every day a person has to draw that transcendent aspect of God. We'll call Soiviv into Mamala, into that space. So we have these 2 things come together, and it's through the prayer, through divine service, that we elevate every single one of these days, that we cleanse these days, we elevate them to a higher state, and we reveal the oneness inherent in creation. Okay, chapter 6. But the previous Rebbe his chapter 10 doesn't end here, and he continues, and he says, says that now that we've just addressed this idea that person elevates the world, and here we have, just now in chapter 5, we discussed this idea of elevating through prayer, this idea of cleansing and washing and rinsing the dirt off of the material world and the human experience, and how the humanness and the material aspect of the person taints the sort of the sublime spiritual aspect of it, and prayer is the way we cleanse it. says that through this divine service, we take the kesher, the attachment of the so the word, just a reminder we've talked about in past years, we're going to touch on a little bit here. The last several chapters of the previous Rebbe's Maimer, starting with in chapter 7, I think he starts talking about this idea of the crushing, that the beams, the pillars of the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the desert was made up of the walls of the tabernacle were pillars, were beams, a bunch of beams that were stood together, stood in sockets, and that's what comprised the wall was comprised of beams with a bolt that went all the way through all of them to hold them all together. These beams were called crushing. A keresh means a beam, and that's what the wall was made of a series of beams. The word keresh, which is the word for the pillar, for the beam of the tabernacle, has the same three letters as the word sheker, which means lie, and the word kesher, which means attachment or knot. And in the previous chapters, the previous chapter dissected this idea very, very thoroughly. The three letters, the meaning of the words, and even the meaning of each letter, the way each letters. But that's already that's not our topic here, so we're not going to revisit that now. But the point is that we take the kesher and the sheker, meaning there's the falseness of this world, the idea that the world presents itself as something other than God, something separated, apart from God, and you transform it into a beam to house God. That the world itself becomes the place that is hospitable to God. Where's God made at home? In the material world. So you take the sheker, the falseness of this world, where the world seems to reject God, and that very reality, that very beam, as it were, is what houses God, reveals God in this world. So there's the sheker, there's the lie that the world tells, that existence tells, which is that it exists independently. And then there's the kesher, the attachment to that lie, the doubling down on that lie. Meaning, it's not just enough that a person is let's say, intimidated by the material world, but he becomes sort of a slave to it, becomes attached to it. That becomes his whole perspective. He becomes rooted and anchored in it. So, previous Rebbe says that through our divine service, and he returns to this idea at the end of chapter 10, that through our divine service in the days, through that, we take the kesher, the attachment to the material world, to the lie that is the material world, and we turn it into a keresh. We turn it into a pillar for the tabernacle, for the temple for God. Right? So he says the oisim kesher keresh. We take that attachment to the material and we turn it into a keresh, into a pillar, a beam for the tabernacle. Behind the kesher, the olam, from the attachment to the world. The fact that the world presents itself as its own independent existence, that's sheker, that's a lie. When a person studies Torah and performs the mitzvahs, this lie is transformed into keresh, which is a keresh l'mishkan, a beam for the tabernacle, olav nemar, upon which it says, make for me a sanctuary, make for me a temple, and I will dwell in it. Which is from the atzei shitim oimdim, from the occasional wood that stands, and connects, attaches the infinite divine light with the material world, as is explained in the previous chapters. So now, in chapter 10, the Friedrich Rebbe says like this. He says, he finishes towards the end of the chapter. We have two more points we're going to make towards the end of the chapter here in our Maimer. But he says that we take we transform the kesher into keresh. That from the sheker, from the lie of the world, which presents itself as foolish, as we just read here, we just quoted this reading, right? So that we transform it into a home for God. Now, the Rebbe references here what we said previously, and particularly last year in the Maimer, in chapter 9 of the previous Rebbe's Maimer, and in the Rebbe's Maimer from 1959. So the Rebbe touches on this point, the idea of connecting, taking the kesher and the sheker and turning it into keresh. What's the significance of a keresh? What's the significance of the beam of the Mishkan of the tabernacle? So the significance is, as he explained at length in the Maimer last year, based on chapter 9 of the previous Rebbe's Maimer, the function of a beam is to attach the ceiling and the floor, that they become united, they become one. So what's the symbolism of attaching the ceiling and the floor? The symbolism is you have a ceiling that's above, you have the floor that's below, and the beam brings the two together. Seemingly, they're two incompatible things. One is a lowly space. The floor that people trample on represents lowliness. The ceiling is when people look up. You look up to beyond yourself, something that's above the person, something that's higher. And yet the beam or the wall attaches the ceiling and the floor that they become one. They become united. They're combined. Now, as discussed in last year's Maimer, when we say that the beam, the function, we're saying here that the function of the keresh of the Mishkan is to attach the floor and the ceiling, right? So the Rebbe says we're being very specific here. We're not just saying you're taking the material world, you're turning into a home for God. You're taking earth and you're turning it into heaven. It doesn't say you're taking earth and turning it into heaven. On one hand, it says we're taking actually heaven, bringing heaven down to earth. That's God dwells in this world. But at the same time, we're saying we're attaching the floor and the ceiling, meaning the floor is a floor and the ceiling is a ceiling, and our service connects the two. After connecting them, what do you have? You have a ceiling, you have a floor. It's just that the oneness is found in both of them, both in the ceiling and the floor. But the floor is still a floor and the ceiling is still a ceiling. In other words, the divine service of a Jew to make this world a home for God is not about negating the material world. It's not, so we talked about earlier from the Tzemach Tzedek, we talked about prayer, the idea that we have to include our service of God, the materialism and the unholy has to be drafted into the service of God, that we can't just serve God with our godly soul, because to ignore the animal soul then would throw into question what we mean when we say God is one. Because clearly there's a domain that we're ignoring where God is not felt as one. So therefore we have to draft the animal soul into our divine service, and therefore we pray. Prayer allows us to elevate the lower parts, the darker parts of our heart. But at the same time, the result is that we elevate, we raise, as we quoted earlier in the previous paragraph, prayer is likened to a ladder through which a person ascends, rises, goes higher. So the person's elevated. So if we were to apply what we just said before about the importance of filling every single day and our divine service bringing God down into this world and making this world a home for God, and therefore we have to elevate, the result would be not a keresh, not a beam that connects the floor and the ceiling. The result would be that the ceiling has been elevated, the floor has been elevated and is now part of the ceiling. And yet the emphasis of the making of for God a home in this world, and the focus that the previous Rebbe places in his series on this idea of the beams, this fixation on the beams, the pillars, and the function of the pillars to connect the floor and the ceiling means that there's something even deeper here. That to make this world a home for God is not to turn earth into heaven, but to bring God into earth as it remains earth, as it remains below. The floor is a floor. And yet our job is to connect the floor with the ceiling, as it remains a floor. So for that, we're missing some more interpretation, more understanding what this means. And this is also can be understood in the idea of time. And that will continue with this next paragraph on top of page Chaf Hey. The Rebbe introduces a concept from the Rebbe Marash, teaching the Marash, which will help us understand this idea of how it is that we can, through our divine service, attach the floor and the ceiling. Not raise the floor that it becomes part of the ceiling, but to attach the two where the floor remains a floor and yet is still attached and is completely united and is one with the ceiling, which we'll get to in Mr. Shem in the next class.